As an anchor colleague friend of mine says, let's make the most of the time we have.
Absolutely.
I want to start discussing support, where you identify it, where it is and where it may not be. Yesterday, the Buffalo News released a poll suggesting that 86% of Catholics surveyed would like you to resign. When you heard that, what were you thinking?
You know, I was not, of course, happy to see that, but I've learned over the years not to give too much credence to polls. There are so many, there's so much wiggle room in how polls are done and what are people thinking when they respond to a poll. I depend, not that I wouldn't take it seriously for sure, but I depend more on what I learn from the various groups I have regular contact with. For example, just one example, an important consultative group of mine in every diocese, there is one, it's called the Diocesan Pastoral Council. And here it's about 30, mostly laity. There's one priest and one sister according to the bylaws, but the rest are laity who are not chosen by me but by the vicars, the priests in their regions. There has to be regional representation. Then we represent the ethnic communities. There's always someone from the African American group, Hispanic. We always have a high school student and a young adult. So it's broad. And they consult with me on everything and anything. And we had a 2-hour meeting Saturday morning. And one of the questions they had on the agenda at the end was a vote of confidence or no confidence. And they decided they would do that vote after a very robust morning of discussion. And I said, you can throw every single question and concern at me. And they did. And then they said, Bishop, please step out of the room for a while. So they debated for about 20 minutes. And when I came back in, they told me that the result was 24 had voted in favor of my not resigning, my staying. 4 had voted for me to resign and 1 abstention. And these are people with whom I work on a regular basis on diocesan issues and challenges. So something like that for me counterbalances, because these are people who know me well. They know how I think. They know what my values are. And that kind of thing is important. Plus the mail we're getting every day.
But if the poll were even 20 percentage points off, it would still suggest that a substantial number of folks in the diocese, your parishioners, would like to see you to go.
And some of them lapsed. And I'm not sure the question, you can probably fill me in, I'm not sure the question in the poll was, do you want the bishop to resign because of the sexual abuse crisis? What I saw was simply, and I might have read it wrong, Steve, do you think the bishop should resign?
Do you feel Bishop Malone should resign?
Right, yes. Now there could be, let's think about that for a minute, there could be many, many, many reasons, even apart from the horror of the abuse crisis, why some people would want me to resign. I know some people don't like the church's position, for example, on abortion, which I speak out often about. Some may not like my personality. You know what I mean? I mean, there could be, I don't know that for sure. But I pay attention to it, but I don't exaggerate its importance in my own discernment.
At what point would you believe that you've lost the people in the pews?
I think that if, in fact, the Holy See, if the Vatican were to do a review of the situation, something I'd be very open to, by the way, if they would assign someone to look into the whole situation, someone from outside to look into it, and after a careful review, and usually with those things, whoever is put in charge of that will interview lots of people on all sides of the issue, fact-finding. And if then the report came back from Rome that the Holy Father thought I should resign, then that's, of course, something I would, out of obedience, do immediately.
You mentioned at your most recent news conference that you felt you had the support of a majority of the clerics in the diocese, and that if you didn't, then you may have to rethink your position on resignation. We're hearing about a no confidence letter being distributed. You concerned about that?
Well, of course, it happened in Boston, as you know, and it had a huge number of priests. As of yesterday, what I read in the Buffalo News, the same as I heard last week, was that a total of 12 priests had signed that letter. We have 391, if you count the active priests and also the senior priests. They don't like me to call them retired because many of them still are active. But there were 391 if you count all of our priests, and religious order guys, and it seems to me that 12 who chose to sign the letter is not really a significant vote of no confidence.
What would be significant?
I don't know. I don't really know. I mean, if it were a majority of them or something, I'd have to rethink it. I wouldn't, no matter what it is, Steve, I wouldn't jump to a conclusion. It would just become part of my discernment. I mean, I pray and think about these things and consult about them every day, as you wouldn't be surprised to hear.
You think about resignation every day?
No, about how to plot a way forward. That's my major reason for wanting to stay on. And believe it or not, and I think it's not to get pietistic because I'm not a pietistic guy by nature, but I know it's God's grace and the good people around me. I really feel calm and confident, believe it or not, about staying on and honoring my commitment I made when I came here to be part of the leading forth of the diocese, not by myself, but with others, lay leaders, my clergy, and all of that. I want to honor the commitment and not just try to escape from the fire.
You are now, I guess, former priest secretary, Father Richard Malone, told us that your senior advisors were split on whether you should stay or resign. Later, I talked with Cheryl Clare, who works in this building, had your pro-life office, and she said she thought that assessment was fairly accurate, that your senior advisors are split.
Well, my most senior advisors are 5 or 6 people we call the senior staff. So I don't know where Father Richard was coming up with that, because I know those people around me, my chancellor and Father Corrales, my vicar general, these people are all so I'm not sure how he defined senior staff, senior advisors, but I do know my key people are very supportive.
So there is no dissent within this building?
That I couldn't say. There may well be. I don't, actually, with 120 in the building, I don't speak to each one every day. I wish I could. So I'm sure there are some pockets of dissent. I've not been told that, but the ones I do relate with, and I go every day to the cafeteria here just to have lunch with a broad range of people. Sometimes I sit with the assistants and the secretarial staff, sometimes with division heads, just to kind of hear what's going on, and everybody seems supportive to me, but I don't know what's in their heads.
So if no one in this building has come up to you and said, you should seriously consider resignation?
Honestly, no. No, that has not happened.
Is it possible that maybe you spend too much time in this building?
No, that's one of the things I enjoy is getting out of the building and getting around to parishes and schools. And I still have quite a few invitations to come out to the parishes and schools. I start my confirmation schedule next week, and looking forward to that. And yeah, pretty much, I'm keeping most of my schedule as you've seen it. Sometimes, if I hear there's going to be some kind of protest, once I pulled out of the Catholic Charities Leadership Dinner. I can handle protests. Pretty much any bishop can in this day and age. But I just didn't think it was a good thing for those good folks who've been so committed to Catholic Charities, even in a difficult climate in the diocese, to have to come in and sense some disruption and anger and all of that. So I decided I would not go to it, which was a sacrifice to me because I like to thank those folks personally.
About the protesters.
Yes.
They were the reason why the pastoral council meeting was moved to Christ the King.
Right. Again, to spare the pastoral council people that, if you're going into an important meeting, I mean, everyone knows these protests are going on. It's not like it's a secret that we're trying to keep. But for me, to have people coming to an important meeting, and it was a meeting for serious discussion of the issues and discernment, and looking for real candor from me, which I always try to give. I honestly have nothing to hide. People think I'm hiding things, but I'm not. Sometimes when you're working through cases, there's a period of time things have to stay confidential in any profession. But I just didn't want people to have to come in there, coming to a good meeting they were looking forward to, and then have to drive through a bunch of people who were, going to be, their message was probably going to be upsetting or alarming. So that's why we moved it. And not without consultation here. Matter of fact, someone told me recently, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'll say it. Someone told me Bishop, you're known for being consultative, but maybe you're too consultative. Maybe you consult too long before you make a decision, but that's my style.
But the context on the protest. We currently have in this area a sitting congressman under indictment. He doesn't see the number or the volume of protest events that you've seen in the last month.
Yeah.
Doesn't that send a signal to you?
No. It sends a signal that for some reason or other, my former executive assistant has really made a major goal. To me, this is how it seems to me and many others.
You're talking about Siobhan?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Seems to have made a major goal right now. I'll just say it how it feels to me and many others, just to bring me down. I feel like she has tried to paint me as the worst villain of the century. And it's constant. And, you know, I was taught in the seminary years ago, every single day, to have what we call an examination of conscience. Really, you know, to look privately and honestly into my life that day and to see where I have followed the Lord or tried to follow him faithfully in the actions of that day, and where I have missed the mark, where I have failed. I do that every day. And I know where I make missteps. I've admitted that. But I also feel deep in my heart and in my conscience that I am not guilty of anything that is so egregious or so grave that it's a reason for me to step down. I mean, I'm an honest guy with myself. I want you to know that. And I talk to trusted advisors as well.
But doesn't that say something that your former executive assistant, your now, I guess, former priest secretary, people who spent arguably the most time with you during the course of your day, working day, are both now standing on the outside saying, you have to go?
Well, to be honest with you, it's been a very, very painful thing. And in particular, I don't want to say too much about this because I don't want to hurt anybody, but in particular, what Father Richard has done, which was a total shock to me, that he would reveal conversations of senior staff meetings that would happen right at this table, week after week, almost every Tuesday morning, you know, about the most sensitive issues, what we have to work out and plan how do we move forward on these kinds of things. That he would have gone and done that is, to me, very, very painful. I mean, this is a guy with whom I not only worked, but I shared residence with him in the bishop's house for 6 years. We must have driven thousands of miles around the diocese going to parish visits and confirmations, and I always felt I could be totally honest with him, even to the point of, at the house, just the two of us, you know, having prayer and having a glass of wine together, almost just like, you know, two guys talking honestly. I trusted him 100%. And I didn't know even in some of those settings that he was taping those conversations. So it's just it's very hard for me even to talk about it right now. I can feel it in my gut, so to speak.
But there he is, person who probably on a personal level knows you the best, close enough to you to see, if not everything, most everything you're involved in. And he says, you should leave, you should resign in the best interest of the diocese.
I don't understand it. I really don't. I hope someday I'll have a chance to sit down with him and explore that. I mean, I think many people, and this is word on the street, many people have assumed that Father Richard's concern for his friend Matthew Bolshanovsky and that relationship, whatever the nature of it was, and Father Richard always told me when I asked him there's nothing inappropriate about it. People out there tell me they think that he was trying to draw attention. This is not my theory. I hear it from others. Draw attention of the media away from that, because we knew that so-called love letter was out there. We knew the stations had it, and that perhaps to draw attention to me was a way to deflect from that. That's not my theory, but people have said that to me as a possibility.
Because you brought this up, I'm going to ask a couple of questions.
Please do.
Matthew Bojanowski, were you aware he was in the bishop's residence?
You know, I never once, both when we lived at Oakland Place,
Right.
and then last, I think, November, we sold that for the Victims Fund. We moved to the Fillmore
Stands.
District, yep. And I never, except once or twice a year when I would have all 30 of the seminarians over for Christmas party, I never once saw Matthew in either of the houses.
So you didn't know he was in your house?
No, I did not. If I knew it, it was after the fact. But I never knew that, apparently, that moment that's referred to in that letter says something about in the bishop's library. I had to be out of town on vacation or at a meeting when that happened, because I never knew he was coming to the house, or maybe Richard told me after the fact that he came through and they had supper. I don't remember that at all.
So
but I never saw him there.
So do you have any knowledge of anything inappropriate about that relationship?
No, I do not. That's why when I was quoted in the Buffalo News a couple of weeks ago, there was a front page, big picture of me, and a little clip on the side that was from one of the tapes, and I can't quote it right now. But I had said to Richard something about that relationship with Matthew. I wish I should have brought it with me. You know what I mean, though. And it was probably the second time I asked him if there's anything inappropriate about that I should be concerned about. I actually asked him once, is there anything sexual going on? And both times he said, no, Bishop. Looked me right in the eye. So that was my point. I said, you deny it, okay? And I wasn't saying I didn't believe him, but in saying, I was really trying to say that better be the truth, because if it's not, since my credibility is already wounded, if there is something going on between you and him, okay, and you're not telling me about it so I can deal with it, there's going to be more trouble. That was the context of that conversation. I remember it clearly.
Well, I did have listened to the recordings, and I knew that you knew who I was because my name got mentioned quite a few times in one of those conversations about that particular letter.
Yeah, I don't recall that, to tell you the truth.
Okay. One thing
we knew you had it. That's all.
Okay. One thing that disturbed me, maybe even more than the name calling that happened in that meeting, was the portion of the conversation where you're discussing your conversation with Father Jeffrey Nowak. And you reveal that during the course of that conversation, he broke down and cried. I heard laughter in that meeting.
Yeah.
Am I right?
I don't recall. It would not have been for me, because as a matter of fact, that's one of the tragedies of those tapes being released, because when we would have senior staff discussions that were confidential, you always hope you could just be yourself, let your hair down.
But is that how priests behave, talking about sensitive things?
I did not think it was funny at all. I thought it was a sad situation, to be honest with you. And I only mentioned that because it showed the depth, to me, of what that priest was feeling about this, I don't know what you call it, distancing. That was the whole issue, as I look at it, a distancing he was feeling from Matthew.
Right.
And I don't know all the dynamics of that because I wasn't present to it. I just knew all this stuff after the fact.
But even the name calling of other fellow clerics, the two bozos.
Yeah. So, someone did say that.
Who was that?
I don't feel right to reveal. It was not I, but I don't feel right to.
But is that the tenor of the
I'm
discussions?
Not going to break the confidence. Not usually, but when
not usually.
Well, no. Now, see, if I was doing a press conference with you, I am doing one now, a media conference, and I was asked to comment on a particular priest I had concerns about, I myself would not have used some language I used. I would never, in public, have called a priest, what did I call him, a sick puppy? Right. But in a confidential environment, when you're feeling, I'm just being honest with you, when you're feeling frustrated, how are we going to work this thing out? What's going on here? What's the truth? How do we deal with it? I and anyone can get to a point of frustration like that. If this had been a public thing, I would have said a priest with some issues.
Bishop, we want to believe that our religious leaders, our priests, our bishops, our cardinals, are better people. And it clearly wasn't a demonstration of being that.
And I think you have a right to expect that. And we know we failed at it.
Want to talk finances just a little bit?
Sure.
Over the course of the last year, I've from time to time talked with pastors, different parishes all around Western New York. And I usually settle in on a couple of different questions. How's attendance at church? How's attendance at Mass? And what are the collections like? And to a person, they've told me the same thing.
Everything's down a bit.
It's down.
Yeah.
Everything's down. Okay, why? Well, there's the scandal, and there's the bishop. Do you feel any responsibility for the financial and attendance pinches, hardships that the parishes are facing right now?
Well, you know, I watch that carefully too, but once again, as I've told people, I will own errors I have made along the line, but I will not own responsibility for 50 or 60 years of tragic, horrific events of abuse of clergy, by clergy of young people, and not just clergy, others, but mostly priests. And I think the whole thing has all been piled up, and for some, that's not to evade any faults of my own, but I feel like it's been so piled up that for some people, when they think of me, they think of all of that. And I'm just not going to, honestly, in my own conscience, hold myself accountable for all of that. I have to watch this carefully. I do watch, and I talk to pastors too, believe me, and they talk to me.
I'm sure.
And I'm very concerned about that. I had 2 weeks ago, I called all the priests together at the seminary to talk through all of this, to talk through the Child Victims Act, and the implications of that for the diocese and for the parishes. There's great concern out there, as you can imagine, for the impact of this whole thing on parish life and ministry. But I do follow it carefully.
I want to get one more question, then move on to bankruptcy.
Sure.
As an issue, because we're surprisingly running out of time.
We're okay. I'm okay.
You're okay? Good. About the finances, one of the things that I've been told by parishioners about giving to Catholic Charities, to their church, is that portions of both of those monies collected goes to the diocese. And they expressed to me reluctance because they're concerned that that money will be used to either compensate victims or pay for your legal defense.
Well, the Catholic Charities money is all restricted to the use of Catholic Charities ministries, and there's a portion of that that's called the Fund for the Faith, right, that is to fund essential ministries of the diocese.
41% of what it is they collect traditionally.
Right, that's correct. We did it a different way last year. We gave them options. But that's to support crucial ministries like Catholic Charities, but for example, religious education, youth and young adult ministry is crucial. At the listening sessions I had around the diocese, I had 7 of them. Many of the issues that came up were concerns beyond, even everyone was concerned about the abuse crisis, but some of the people who came from parishes were concerned about what's happening to our teenagers, how come they're not in church. That's been a concern for many, many years. But all those things, concern for hospital ministry and the prison chaplains, and more, cultural diversity, that comes from the Fund for the Faith. And all of those things are restricted to those purposes.
But what the folks over at Catholic Charities have told me, because I asked, is they don't receive an accounting of how that money's spent. They hand it over.
Well,
and the diocese, the website, Western New York Catholic lays out what it is that those things are spent on, but
right,
where's the oversight to make sure that that's where that goes?
Well, I think maybe we don't indicate that convincingly enough, but we have that information. And one of the things I pledged to the Movement to Restore Trust, with whom I still hope we might be able to work, I'm praying about that, it's up to them mainly, but I'm open, is that we would have more financial transparency. And we've already begun to work in that direction. There's nothing being hidden. Most dioceses have separate campaigns for Catholic Charities and then for all the diocesan things, like religious ed and all the evangelization efforts. We've just done it here for years before I came as kind of a joint effort. But there's no reason why we can't do what you're saying.
In regards to transparency, I've asked this question before, and Kathy has told me we don't talk about vendors, but specifically about legal defense. Given the number of cases, given the number of cases that came forward under the IRCP, why can't parishioners know what's being spent on legal advice? It's the money that they give to you. Why can't they know how much it gets spent on lawyers?
We, as with many other dioceses, have had a long-standing policy that prevents us from giving that kind of information out, that involves our contracts with our vendors, in this case with our attorneys. And we feel it's up to those vendors if they wish to give that information out.
But in the
But we
name,
can- we
but in the
always-
name of
we
transparency,
visit
isn't
all
it
these
time that they know how much gets spent?
But not, well, it's a worthwhile question to be pursued, but the point at which the response finds itself right now is that we don't feel that's an appropriate way to go. But we're looking, believe me, we're looking at all of these things.
It would answer a lot of questions to a lot of people.
Sure, I get that.
Bankruptcy. The Rochester Diocese announced it filed for Chapter 11 protection. Immediately, the questions around here was, okay, is Buffalo next? There have been 20 now dioceses in the U.S. that have filed for bankruptcy.
Correct.
Is this the direction we're heading?
To be honest with you, Steve, we're trying to figure that out now. That's the honest-to-God truth.
How close is that decision?
Well, I'm not, the people we're conferring with on both sides of the issue, because there's a debate going on among the experts about whether we should litigate or try to litigate or file Chapter 11. That is an ongoing debate, but the advice from both sides seems to be for us not to make that decision quite yet. Now, I don't think, and I have no expertise at all. I used to be a theology professor years ago. I don't know about bankruptcy law. I just don't. And I'm discovering it's very, very complicated. But the fact of the matter is we've been advised that for us, at least here in Buffalo, we need to take a little bit more time. We know now, as of today, I just checked this morning, we've had 137 lawsuits filed by victim survivors in the Child Victims Act, representing 163 victim survivors. The reason for that is, of course, the disparity is because some of the attorneys cluster the lawsuits into one rather than having several, 5 or 6 individual ones. So what we're doing, I personally think we cannot wait too long to make this decision, but the advisors on both sides who are arguing this out agree that it's premature right now. We want to see what the continuing flow of these cases looks like.
130 plus defending and or settling and or losing jury verdicts?
I know.
Tens of millions?
Yeah.
Maybe over 100 million?
And one of the, I'm told, never having been through this question before in my life, and never thinking I would be, but I am now, I'm told too that if we go the litigation route, that the first cases that come through could be very, very large awards, you know, in the 7 figures rather.
Right.
And that could evaporate the resources so that victim survivors further down the line, I don't know how they line up those cases, what first come, first served, or I don't know how the courts do that, but that there could be fewer and fewer dollars left for those who come in late. And by the end of it, that's one of Rochester's arguments, by the end of the whole time of this period of litigation, there might be nothing left at all. And that seems to me unjust and unacceptable. And I think from what I'm told, you can avoid that happening if we were to file Chapter 11. So we're trying to listen hard to both sides, and as I say, I'm coming at this with great interest, but as a total amateur. I just don't know about it.
What are the resources like? I know you have investments for the diocese. I know you have real estate.
We have investments, almost 18 million of those reserves. This comes mainly from investments over the years.
Right.
18 million of those reserves have already been given out through the Independent Reconciliation and Compensation Program, which I think was a well-intentioned and honest effort to give an option to victim survivors if they wanted to take. And something like 85% of the ones who put their claims into those independent administrators accepted the offer. So that was helpful for those. We knew not everyone would do that, but it was a first step. So that evaporated some of our reserves, and there are more reserves left, but not what we once had. We know that if we go the bankruptcy route, they're going to look at all of our assets. They'll look at this building.
Sure.
And I'm prepared. 2 years ago, or 3, because the number of staff here had dropped over the years. Bishop Head purchased this building when the Courier Express closed down, I think in the 50s, that sound right? I think.
80s.
Oh, I'm sorry, the 80s, that's right.
82,
Yeah, Bishop Head wasn't here in the
I think it
50s,
was.
that's right, I'm sorry. In the 80s, and he saw it as an opportunity to bring most of the diocesan offices that were all over the place into one building, which is always a good thing for synergy and communication and trust building.
Sure.
I would have done the same. But back then, in the 80s, we had about 240 employees in this building, in all the various departments. And now we probably have 120. And the building is too large for our needs. So even before the abuse crisis became so...
You were thinking about downsizing.
We were thinking about it. In fact, we looked at a couple of other buildings in the city, but for various reasons, including availability of parking, different things. What it would cost us. One building we looked at, it was going to cost more than the appraised value of this building at the time to get that one up and running just for basic use as office space. It was an old high school. So you know, I'm realizing we may have to let go of some assets, including where we're sitting right now. And I'm ready to do it if we have to.
What's your timetable on making that decision?
Well, that's a good question that's been on my mind. That was, in fact, that was thoughts while shaving this morning. That I want to set a deadline very soon for this decision to be made.
30 days?
I don't know yet. I have to talk to the others. I bring my finance people around the table, and the lawyers who are on both sides of this crossroads, I call it, whether we do bankruptcy or we try to litigate.
Before the end of the year?
Oh, I think it has to be. That's my thought. But I want to listen more. That's what I mean about consulting. But I know the consulting has to have a deadline, and we have to make a decision.
Okay.
Either way, it will cost us. It will be painful, but it's what we owe the victim survivors.
Whichever direction you go, either to litigate or go to
File
bankruptcy.
11.
Yeah, go Chapter 11. Those processes seem like they will take years to play out. So really, no matter what decision you make, this likely passes on to the next bishop.
Oh, I think it will. I think it will. I've been advised, you're exactly right, Steve, that whichever route we take, this will go 2-3 years, maybe more. And according to church law, as I'm sure you know in the Catholic tradition, a bishop's letter offering to resign has to be sent to the Pope on his 75th birthday, which for me is a year and a half from tomorrow. It just occurred to me this morning. But what I would like to do, to the best of my abilities, with those who will work with me, with the priests who are still with me and the laity and religious, and there are many, is if we can move forward with our outreach to victims, trying to make that more compassionate and everything that needs to happen, then I hope we will have prepared, I hesitate to use the word the playing field, but it's an easy metaphor, of the diocese for my successor, for the new bishop, whoever he may be, to be able to move forward in a way that will even be able to raise the hope of the people even higher. But I want to be part of the rebuilding of that hope.
You've talked frequently about moving forward to getting past this crisis, to rebuilding the trust that parishioners have in the diocese. At this point, do you find yourself an impediment to that process because you've become a polarizing figure within the people of Western New York?
It's a good question, Steve, and a complicated one, because I know that I am not responsible, I believe, for most of that polarization. I believe the constant hammering on this whole thing. There was something in the Buffalo News article, I think it may have been yesterday or the day before, there was a report on one of the parishes where the president of the parish pastoral council, I should have brought it with me, had a nice quote in there, and he said, I can only paraphrase it, I should have brought it. He said something like, this bishop is taking the brunt and taking the bullet for years and years and years of abuse before him. But he said that's the way it is in any corporation. If the things have gone bad, the CEO has to step down, even admitting I'm not responsible for it all.
Right.
You know?
But you're the presenter of
I get it.
the bad news
Yeah.
of decades of, if I may, lying
Yeah.
by this diocese about how big this problem was. Continuously, whenever this popped up,
Keep in mind,
it's a couple of bad eggs.
and I'm the first bishop here ever to publish the list of the names of the accused priests, all of whom were off the job, by the way. But the cases, mysteriously to me, were never sent to Rome as they were supposed to have been for adjudication.
But because all of this comes out at once, people are understanding. Catholics are understanding. that their trust was being betrayed.
And I get it.
At the highest level
I
here.
get it.
And you're the spokesperson for that.
Right. But I'm not responsible for it.
But nonetheless, so many have attached you to it.
I know, but I'm not ready at this point to succumb to that, because it's not all the truth, you know? And I just can't get myself in my own conscience to that point. I don't intend to.
So you're going to stand and fight?
I am going to stand and fight, because I know, whatever the polls show, I know that my own conscience is good on this. I mean, I know, Siobhan O'Connor most recently has a sign about something like, we want, or we need a good shepherd, and the accent was on the words good in big red letters. Well, I honestly, I'm not a perfect shepherd. I know that. There's only one perfect shepherd, is Jesus. But I believe I'm a good shepherd. And I believe I have been a good shepherd. Do good shepherds make mistakes? Yes. Are there things good shepherds wish they had done differently? Of course. And do they decide to do things differently going forward? Absolutely. But I believe, with God's help and the support of the people I know I have, not everybody, that we can do this with God's help. And I just want to be part of that. The easy way out for me would be to call Washington, to the Apostolic Nuncio, and say, look, I just can't deal with it anymore, okay? Please ask the Holy Father if I can step down, because it's not all my decision. But I'm nowhere near that point. But I'm paying attention to all the signs.
But that would require people to forgive you, which is a fundamental Christian tenet.
Yeah, and there are those who have. I have the mail, and there are those who
Have not.
Yes, and there are those who express confidence in me. I believe it or not, I can show them to you after this taping. I get letters from people almost every day now, actually almost begging me to stay on. They say, we need you. We can't have all of a sudden a vacuum here with the Child Victims Act. You know, I've been part of the dynamics of all of this. I know the thing inside and out. I know what didn't happen decades ago and should have, and I've admitted it many times. I've admitted that I could have done things better with those early cases of priests with misconduct with adults, not with children. My record on that is good, thanks to the Dallas Charter. You know, little facts that don't get out there, if I may too. With children, with the abuse of children, which is the most horrendous, I think we'd all agree, kind of abuse that could ever happen. Any is bad, but children is the worst, and teens. The good news is that we have not had one substantiated allegation of abuse against any priest of this diocese ordained in the past 30 years. So the Dallas Charter, you know what that is, for the protection of the kids,
I do.
and what they're trying hard to do at the seminary with very strict admissions, and we're looking all that over again, and the way the young men are formed, it's a word we use as human beings. Before I'm concerned about how they'll be as pastoral ministers or how their intellect is formed by Christian theology, my bottom line is, how are they as human beings? Are these good, healthy, integrated humans who know who they are, who know what their sexuality is about and how to live that in a chaste, celibate way? So we've worked on that for a long time. Seminaries are in a healthier, and ours is too, way than they used to be. But I told the rector yesterday, we've got to look at it all again, up close, make sure. Never take our eye off the ball.
Are you interested in continuing the work at the seminary?
Yes.
You would like to see it stay open?
I
Because there
would.
are those that are afraid that maybe this is one of the things that goes if you head towards bankruptcy.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I see the seminary as an essential part of the life of the diocese, not just because we prepare our priests there, our permanent deacons there, but we have a number of lay women and men who study there to become what we call lay church ministers. And I don't want to lose a degree-granting theological pastoral faculty. We also use the seminary for all kinds of gatherings. In many ways, it really is the heart of the diocese. In fact, one of the priests out there thought he would shock me recently by saying, Bishop, 795 Main Street is not the heart of the diocese, it's the seminary, because that's where future ministry comes from. And I said, you're absolutely right. So to me, it's a treasure. And I just met with the new rector yesterday, Father Kevin Cray. He had been vice president at Niagara. And he has already created a new positive morale there. And we feel very confident. We have work to do, but I want to do everything I can to keep it not only alive, but flourishing.
I'm at quarter after, so
I'm afraid I gotta.
you got to go.
I wish another time we can give some more time.
I would like that.
I feel comfortable with you. You're good. You're straight on.
Thank you. We try.
Yep.
Appreciate it, Bishop. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.